Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I had one of those days that seemed like it would stretch on forever, grey skies, drizzle in the air, and that familiar, heavy sense of being slightly lost, not geographically, but just in life. I was heading to a meeting across town, the kind where you leave your heart somewhere in the room and hope it survives the scrutiny. I hadn't planned on anything unusual, just a cab ride and some quiet reflection. But I remember opening the door to the taxi and stepping inside, the faint warmth from the heater washing over me. He smiled when I settled in. It wasn't a small, polite smile, it was wide, genuine, like someone who had seen enough of the world to know the value of a simple, human connection. Rough day? He asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. His voice was calm, deep, and just the right pace, not hurried, not intrusive. That I hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the ease of his question. Most drivers just ask where you're going and focus on the traffic, but this felt different. I nodded slowly. You could say that, I murmured. He nodded, as if he understood, though I had shared nothing yet. Then, without being intrusive, he started talking, not to fill the silence, but in a way that made it feel like we were coasting together in our own little bubble amidst the city chaos. He talked about the weather, about little quirks of the neighborhood we were passing, and about the rhythm of the streets, as though he had spent his whole life observing them in a way most people overlook. I found myself relaxing, leaning back into the seat, letting my thoughts drift. His presence was comforting, not overbearing, but there was a subtle tension in the way he observed me that made me aware of myself in an unusual way. Not in a self-conscious way, but as if he saw the small details, the way I fidgeted with my scarf, the slight tiredness around my eyes, and acknowledged them without judgment. At some point, I caught his gaze in the mirror, and he just smiled again. It was disarming. I felt this strange mix of curiosity and warmth, the kind that makes you want to tell someone things you haven't said in years. And then, almost impulsively, I started talking. I told him about the meeting I was going to, about the little worries that had been gnawing at me, the sense of being pulled in too many directions. He listened without interrupting, only offering a nod or a soft hum of understanding at just the right moment. I can't tell you exactly what he said that made me feel lighter, but it was something about noticing the little victories in each day, about how even in the rush and grind of life, there's room for something quietly beautiful. Somewhere along the ride, the conversation shifted. We laughed softly at some small shared observation about the city, a stray dog running across the street with reckless abandon, a couple arguing over umbrellas in the drizzle. There was this moment when we both laughed, not loudly, but just enough to break a wall I hadn't realized I was carrying with me. The city lights flickered as the rain continued, and I realized I had been staring out the window, watching reflections in the puddles, while feeling this unexpected sense of ease. I didn't even notice the minutes passing. The ride that I expected to be just a means to an end had become something more. He had a way of drawing people into the moment, of making a brief, ordinary encounter feel suspended in a calm, almost timeless space. By the time we neared my destination, I realized I was reluctant for the ride to end. There was a quiet intimacy in the shared space, a mutual understanding that neither of us needed to explain, and yet, something meaningful had passed between us. I thanked him when he pulled over, and he simply smiled again, that same warm smile that had started this unexpected journey. Take care, he said. Remember to notice the little things. They matter more than we think. I nodded, stepping out into the drizzle, feeling lighter than I had in days. And as the taxi pulled away, I caught myself watching it disappear into the rain, realizing that some moments, even brief ones with strangers, can leave a mark that lingers far longer than you expect. For years after, I would remember that ride, not for where I was going, but for the rare and quiet connection with someone who made an ordinary afternoon feel unexpectedly profound. The memory of that cab ride stayed with me in a way I didn't anticipate. Over the next few days, I found myself replaying small moments, the way he had tilted his head slightly when I spoke, the ease in his voice, the way the rain had caught the city lights and made everything shimmer like a photograph. It wasn't that I wanted to see him again, It was that I realized how rare it was to encounter someone who could make a fleeting moment feel substantial. Life, of course, carried on. Meetings, emails, and errands filled the days, but I noticed subtle changes in myself. I started walking a bit slower, noticing the rhythm of the streets as I had in the cab. I began to appreciate the way sunlight hit the buildings in the early morning, the sound of leaves rustling on a windy day, the quiet conversations of people I passed on the sidewalk. His words had planted something small but persistent, this awareness that life had layers often overlooked. A week later, I had to take another taxi for a routine appointment across town. I didn't expect to see him, of course. Taxi drivers, after all, are not characters that linger in your daily routine. But as I climbed into the cab, there he was, behind the wheel, smiling at me like he had been waiting to continue our last conversation. My heart skipped in a way that felt almost childish, but it was full of warmth, not romance, just the delight of an unexpected reunion with someone who had left an impression. Back again, he said, his voice calm and welcoming. Or maybe you just enjoy the ride. I laughed, shaking my head. You could say that. You made my last ride memorable. He nodded, as if that were enough explanation, and I realized how rare it was to meet someone who could be present without pressing for more. The ride started, and the city passed by in the same steady rhythm, but this time I felt a little braver. I told him more about my life, about the little frustrations at work, about my attempts to stay grounded amidst the chaos, about the family obligations that often left me stretched thin. He listened, as before, with that quiet attentiveness that made you feel heard in the deepest sense. And then he shared little snippets of his own life, not stories that demanded sympathy, but glimpses of a person who had also faced challenges, who had learned to observe life carefully. There was something profoundly reassuring in his honesty, in the way he acknowledged difficulties without wallowing in them, in the way he found small joys even on days that felt grey. At one point, as the traffic slowed at a red light, he glanced at me through the mirror and said softly, "You remind me that life is full of moments we often miss. And that's why it matters who you share them with, even if just for a short while." I didn't answer immediately, I simply let his words sink in. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the shared acknowledgement that human connection, simple, fleeting, respectful, was worth noticing. I felt a lump in my throat, the kind that comes from realizing how much weight even a casual encounter can carry. As we drove, the city seemed to slow around us. The neon lights reflected on wet asphalt, a bus rumbled past with its own soft hum, and for the first time in months, I felt unhurried, fully present. There was a subtle tension in the quiet, the kind that doesn't demand anything but heightens awareness. I noticed the way his hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, the way his eyes scanned the road while still seeming attuned to me. By the time we reached my destination, I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and melancholy. Moments like these are rare, they feel fleeting, but they leave a residue, a memory that grows heavier with reflection. I thanked him as I stepped out of the cab, and he gave me the same warm smile that had started this new chapter of awareness. "Take care," he said again. "Notice the little things. They make all the difference." I nodded, watching him drive away, and for some reason, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because my problems were solved, but because someone had reminded me that life could be observed, appreciated, and shared, even briefly, in ways that mattered more than I realized. That day, I didn't just arrive at an appointment, I arrived at a subtle understanding about presence, connection, and the quiet influence people can have on your life without even trying. And though I didn't know if I'd see him again, I carried that lesson with me, tucked into my thoughts like a secret treasure, waiting for the next unexpected moment to unfold. Days turned into weeks, and though I tried not to think about it too much, I realized I was almost looking forward to taking a taxi just to see him again. It wasn't something I planned or consciously hoped for, it was more like a quiet anticipation, the way you might wait for a friend's call or a letter that always brightens your day. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, as the sky darkened earlier than usual, I found myself stepping into a cab, almost on autopilot. And, as if the universe had a sense of timing, it was him. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, that familiar, easy smile stretching across his face. There was a calm certainty in the way he nodded at me, as if our previous rides were threads woven into a shared tapestry, waiting to be continued. Back again, he said, and I couldn't help but smile. You seem to have a pattern. I suppose I do, I replied, settling into the seat, feeling the warmth of the cab envelope me. There's a comfort in seeing a familiar face. He nodded knowingly, and we began moving through the rain-slicked streets. There was a quiet rhythm to the ride, punctuated by the soft whoosh of windshield wipers and the muted hum of the engine. I felt a sense of ease that was rare for me, a suspension from the usual weight of responsibilities and worries. This time, the conversation took on a different tone. We began discussing memories, small anecdotes about our childhoods, experiences that had shaped us, and moments we had carried with us over the years. I found myself speaking freely, revealing little pieces of myself I hadn't shared in ages, the dreams I'd set aside, the mistakes I'd regretted, the moments that had left an imprint on my heart. He listened, attentive and compassionate, never prying but offering an understanding that made me feel valued. At one point, he glanced at me through the mirror, his expression thoughtful. It's amazing how much weight we carry without noticing. And sometimes, sharing it, even in small doses, lightens it just a little. His words resonated deeply. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda. Just acknowledgement and connection. And I realized, in that quiet, rainy evening, that human connection doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes, it's the simple, unspoken understanding between two people that lingers longest. The city blurred past as we drove. Lights reflected in puddles, and the rain seemed to soften the edges of the world, washing everything in muted colors. I noticed the subtle details, the way his hands moved confidently on the wheel, the careful way he navigated through traffic, the quiet patience in his demeanor. There was an unspoken dialogue happening, not through words, but through shared presence, and it felt unexpectedly profound that we laughed about small things, too, the odd behavior of a pedestrian, the way a streetlight flickered in time with the rain, the music playing faintly from a nearby cafe. And with each laugh, each exchange, I felt lighter, as though the ride itself was becoming a form of quiet therapy. There was no rush, no urgency, just two people sharing a moment suspended in time. When we reached my destination that evening, I felt a pang of reluctance to leave. The world outside seemed sharper, louder, more immediate, and I had grown fond of this gentle pause between reality and reflection. I stepped out of the cab, thanking him, and he offered the same warm, steady smile that had welcomed me on our first ride. Remember, he said softly, it's not the destination that matters, but what you notice along the way. I nodded, touched by the simplicity of his wisdom. I watched as the cab disappeared into the rainy night, carrying with it the quiet intimacy of our shared rides, the lessons of observation and presence, and the lingering warmth of human connection. That night, as I reflected on the past few weeks, I realized something important. Sometimes, life surprises you not with grand gestures or dramatic encounters, but with brief, sincere moments that open your heart in ways you didn't expect. And in that reflection, I felt grateful for the rain, for the city, for the chance encounter with someone who reminded me that presence, patience, and empathy are among the most precious gifts we can give and receive. Weeks had passed since that rainy evening, and yet the memory of those cab rides lingered with me in the most unexpected ways. I would catch myself smiling at small moments, a reflection in a puddle, the laughter of strangers, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, and feel a quiet echo of the conversations I had shared with him. It was remarkable how someone you meet briefly can leave a lasting impression, shaping the way you see ordinary life. One afternoon, I found myself needing a ride once again. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary. I simply needed to get across town, like I always did. And, as if fate had been waiting all along, there he was. The same warm smile, the same calm presence. It felt less like coincidence and more like a continuation of a story that had quietly woven itself into my life. Good to see you again, he said, and I realized I felt a sense of comfort I rarely experienced with strangers. How have you been noticing the little things? I laughed softly, feeling the connection that had grown over the weeks. I've been trying, I admitted. Some days better than others. But it's different now. I think I actually see more than I used to. He nodded, eyes crinkling in that gentle expression that had become familiar. That's all it takes. Small changes, small observations, they accumulate. And before you know it, life feels fuller. We drove through the city in companionable silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need words. And in that silence, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for him, but for the simple act of noticing, of being present. I realized that these rides, brief as they were, had become a mirror, reflecting parts of myself I had neglected for years. At one point, he glanced at me through the mirror and said, "It's rare to meet someone who takes the time to truly observe. Most people are too busy moving from one place to the next. You're different." I felt a warmth rise in my chest, not from vanity, but from the recognition that someone genuinely saw me, in the simplest, purest sense. There was no expectation, no judgment, just presence, acknowledgement, and a shared humanity that transcended our brief encounters. As we neared my destination, the city lights began to twinkle with the onset of evening. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a crisp, fresh scent, and the streets glistened like wet cobblestones in a painting. I realized that the cab ride, which had once seemed like a mundane necessity, had become a space of reflection, of growth, and of quiet revelation. When the car finally stopped, I hesitated before stepping out. I turned to him, wanting to express more than a simple thank you, wanting to convey the unexpected impact he had on my life. "Thank you," I said softly. "For listening, for noticing, for everything." He smiled, that same steady, reassuring smile. "It's been my pleasure." Sometimes we meet people not by chance, but because the moment needs it. Keep noticing. Keep being present. That's all anyone can ask of life. I nodded, stepping out of the cab with a renewed sense of clarity. As I watched him drive away, fading into the twinkling city lights, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The connection we shared had been brief, but its resonance would stay with me forever, a reminder that life's most meaningful moments often appear in the most ordinary circumstances. Walking along the wet streets, I thought about how much weight I had carried before those rides, and how much lighter I felt now. It wasn't a dramatic transformation or a sudden revelation, it was gradual, subtle, and quietly powerful. I had learned to observe, to appreciate, and to be present. And in that presence, I had discovered a deeper understanding of myself and of the world around me. Years from now, I know I will remember those taxi rides, not the destinations, not the errands, not the traffic, but the human connection, the quiet reflection, and the reminder that even in brief encounters, we can find meaning, growth, and unexpected joy. And I hope, wherever you are watching this from, that you, too, take a moment to notice the little things, to connect, and to let life surprise you in the smallest but most profound ways.